Hello and welcome to week 4 of the Principles of Exercise Therapy, and this week we're dealing with functional strength and conditioning in physiotherapy. So here you can see the images of people doing some functional training as opposed to some isolated training. So what's physiotherapy about? It's our centering slide. It's about human anatomy and physiology. It's about human movement and function, maximizing wellness and potential, and minimizing injury and disease. Ultimately, it's about solving real-world problems. By the end of this session, we need you to do the following. You've got to explain the concept of functional fitness. You've got to apply functional movement training according to the 7 movement patterns that we will show you, and then identify the 3 levels of functional movement. So the way we remember the principles of exercise therapy is through a sports billy. So we've got at the top adaptation, then specificity, progression, regression, overload, reversibility, and time out, followed by behavioral change, individuality, lifestyle integration, law of diminishing returns, and your responsibility. Remember, your responsibility is giving the responsibility of their own health back to the patient rather than taking it away from them. So what is functional fitness? Functional fitness is about training your muscles in a system rather than isolating them. So physiotherapy has got a hangover of 1980s bodybuilding mentality, whereas we should be training for the daily tasks that we do in the home, at work, or for sports performance. We've got to think about the individual. It must be person-centered or patient-centered. So how old are they? What gender are they? What's their ability? What's their previous training like? And what's their genetic potential? Then we've got to think about the purpose of what we're doing and the task-specific nature of meaning. So are we doing a sit to stand? Are we just standing up? Are we walking? Are we running? Are we jumping? Are we throwing? What are we doing and why are we doing it? And then we've got some activities of daily living. These are movements that are task related. So washing, dressing, putting on a shirt, putting on a pair of trousers, driving, your car or your mobility scooter, and then of course working and occupational health. So functional training has its origins in rehabilitation. The interventions are designed to incorporate task and context-specific practice in areas that are meaningful to the patient. Okay, a bicep curl is not meaningful to the patient. Okay, taking something from a plate and putting it in your mouth is meaningful. And the overall goal is about functional independence, keeping the patient as independent for as long as we can, as often as we can. So it's an attempt to adapt or develop exercises that help with ADLs, activities of daily living, and stop you getting injured. So here we are on the functional continuum for the lower limb. So on one side of your screen, you've got things like the seated leg extension or the lying leg curl. Now these are isolated body movements, the leg extension building the quadriceps, the lying leg curl developing the hamstrings. These are really from bodybuilding. Okay, that's not what we want to be doing. And at the other side, you've got highly functional stuff. Okay, things like bungee running, death jumps, hopping and bounding. Now that's right at the functional end of the continuum. And in the middle, you've got your functional movements at level 1. Things like squatting, lunging, and deadlifting. If we go down to the upper limb, here we've got non-functional things like bicep curls and tricep extensions. Again, they're taken from bodybuilding, designed to build hypertrophy and muscle. And then at the opposite end, you've got things like punching and throwing. And in the middle, you've got things like pulling and pressing, level 1 functional movements. So this is the continuum of functional movement. So we've got to potentially isolate a muscle first, and then integrate it into the function. We can't just isolate the muscle, get it stronger, and expect it to be better. So there's an assumption that if we just strengthen a muscle, then we get better everything, and that's just not true. There's timing, there's the feel of it. Okay, there's so much more than just training a muscle. And it's assumed that injury occurs as its weakest link in a closed kinetic chain. This might not always be the case. So we've got movements done with machines, and then we've got real life movement. And in real life movement, there's a synergy between the meaningful task and the motor pattern. So if you're just doing a bench press, for example, you get really strong at pressing a weight above your head. But can you push something out of the way? It's the same pattern of movement. However, you're just using one arm to push. Is that translatable? And the answer, no, it's not. Okay, we've got to have real life movements, training for real life. Okay, and in fact, isolating training might be the cause of injury itself, and functional movement training may be the key to avoid injury. So here we are with a continuum. So we have health, which includes your weight, disease management, stress management, and your functional capacity. Functional capacity is your ability to do work or stuff. Then we've got fitness, where we divide it into the components of fitness there. And then we've got performance. Here we're looking for the motor skills, speed, power, agility, reactivity, and they're quite event specific. So remember that exercise comes from the Latin exere, okay, which means to keep busy or to practice. And exercise is a subset of physical activity, and your exercise must be repetitive. Okay, it must be planned, it must be purposeful, and it must be structured. And you remember that with reps. So functional movement, so you've got to move in every direction, in every plane of movement, okay, at every amplitude, every speed, every complexity. That's truly functional movement, okay, and in order to do that, you've got to do stuff at exactly the right time, in the right direction, with just the right amount of force. We introduce you to the 4 P's of functional movement. Purpose. Okay, this is the task-orientated nature of the movement. Posture. Joint position sense. Where do my knees need to be? Where do my shoulders need to be? Where do my hips need to be? And then what position you're in. Are you standing? Are you sitting? Are you walking? Are you lying? And then the pattern of movement. Squatting, pushing, rotating, one of the 7 functional movement patterns that we show you later. So here we are, level 1 functional movements. We've got squatting, which is symmetrical lower limb movement. We've got lunging, which is asymmetrical lower limb movement. We've got pushing or pressing with the upper limb. We've got pulling also with the upper limb. Then we've got twisting, such as bending, chopping or lifting. And then we've got twist resist, things like the plank. Then we've got bending or hinging. This is a deadlift pattern of movement or a kettlebell swing. And then we've got gait, which for this purpose will be walking. So these are level 1 functional movements. If you can't do these level 1 functional movements, you can't progress to level 2. So here they are. Pushing, pulling, rotating, hinging, squatting, and lunging. So we've got these 3 planes of movement. Okay, we've got movement in the sagittal plane. Okay, we've got movement in the frontal plane, and we've got movement in the transverse plane. Okay, so if you're using a particular way of training, you need to move in 3 different directions: forward and back, side to side, and including rotation. And that's functional movement. It's not just one plane of movement, all 3 planes. So remember, we've got 3 foot stance positions: symmetrical stance, which is the squat; asymmetrical stance, the lunge, okay, and single step, okay, which is a stepping pattern where you're actually on 1 foot. So 1 foot as you step up. So let's look at these in more detail. We've got squatting. It's a normal human movement. Remember that sitting on a chair is not. Okay, so most of us struggle with sitting in a squat position simply because we're guilty of the principle of reversibility. So if you can't squat, you've lost this range of movement in your lower back, your hips, your knees and your ankles, particularly in Western communities. And by sitting on chairs for long periods of time, we've limited our mobility and our strength just by sitting down. So here we are, we've got a young baby with a perfect squat. Strong lumbar position. Look at the hip crease. So his hips are below parallel, weight is on the heels, feet shoulder width apart, knees tracking over toes but not beyond, nice upright torso, okay, and his head is in a neutral position. So we will refer to the squat as triple flexion followed by double extension. Okay, so triple flexion because we've got flexion at the hip, knee and the ankle, okay, and then double extension because we extend at the hip and the knee. Triple extension would be jumping, so this is double extension, and it's the foundation of all movements, particularly jumping movements, and you've got to be able to make the shape of the squat, and it's all about developing power in the lower limbs. It's really important. So if you just check your squat now, so how do you squat? Do you have to squat with your heels down or with your heels up? If you have to squat with your heels up, it's because you've lost that range of movement in all those joints. Okay, we're on to the lunge pattern. So lunge is a natural human movement of transferring weight from one leg to the other. The great thing about the lunge is it's a stretching exercise, it's a strengthening exercise, it's a stabilizing exercise, and also it's an asymmetrically loading exercise. That means that you're loading on just one side. Here's an example of a good lunge. Nice upright torso. Okay, the knee and ankle alignment. They've got a vertical shin. The knee tracks directly, okay, over the outside of the foot. It doesn't go in, and we've got nice neutral alignment of the shoulders and the hips. Okay, let's move on to the deadlift. I'm sure you weren't expecting this image, okay, but there's no reason why Granny can't be lifting weights, and that's the hip hinge movement that she's doing there. So bending from the hips is about keeping a neutral spine, knees slightly flexed, and you're just picking something up from the floor, and you're just hinging at the hip like you're taking a bow, okay, and that's the deadlift movement. Okay, so we've got a symmetrical stance deadlift, okay, that'll be a level 1 movement. An asymmetrical stance deadlift, okay, that's a single leg deadlift. Again, that's a level 1 movement, more challenging. Then we've got double extension, which is things like a sumo deadlift high pull, that we'll show you another time. And then triple extension, which would be jumping. So there's an example of the hip hinge. Nice straight back, and he's bending from the waist. Okay, nice neutral spine there. Okay, you'll also see that in kettlebell swinging. That we'll introduce you to later on the course. Kettlebell swing's fantastic for getting that hip hinge movement there. Okay, rotating or twisting, things like throwing, hitting, okay, using sort of martial arts, or chopping movements. Okay, here we've got some rotational movement in a diagonal pattern of movement involving the hip and the thoracic spine. So we've got two types of movements here. We've got lifts and chops. Chops are going from the high to the low, okay, and lifts are going from the low to the high. Things like drawing a sword. So here we are. So examples of twisting with a medicine ball, with an axe, okay, and there's some guys chopping as fast as they can in a competition. Okay, here we go now on to twist or twist resist. Okay, so we've just had the twisting, which is the lifting and chopping, and now we've got the twist resist, which is stabilizing those forces and being able to brace, holding ourselves in a strong position so that we can connect the midline and transmit that force to the extremity. So it's anti-rotation or isometric holding. Got to be in a good position though. So here we are, we've got an example of different types of plank there. So we've got normal plank, side plank, one leg plank, elevated plank, and then when you're taking your arms off as well. All of those bracing in that position. We've got three different types of pull. Okay, so you can pull down like you're doing a pull-up. You can pull something towards you like you're doing a rowing movement, or you can pull something up like you're doing an upright row. Okay, So vertical movements pulling down, vertical movements pulling up, and horizontal movements pulling towards you. Then obviously we've got 3 different types of push. Okay, you've got things pushing something above your head, okay, pushing something down, and then pushing something in front of you. And we've got examples of those particular exercises there. So movement, when we talk about movement, we're looking at the efficiency of the movement, the consistency of the movement, can they repeat it, and the movement resilience. If we added some load or asymmetrical load, can they still repeat the movement? And the biomotor qualities we're looking for are speed, fatigue, and how they perform under pressure or stress. Okay, so there you go. Young kids, they know how to squat, and there's the perfect squat there. Okay, you can do it while you're young. It's only when you sit down lots that you forget how to do that. So we've got our training load table. So we've got to think about strength. So if we're getting strong, you're going to be using a huge amount of load, 85% of your 1 repetition max, your 1 RM, and the goal for this is less than 6 repetitions, and you repeat that between 2 and 6 times. Now for power, the load is down, okay, and you're going to do that maybe 1 or 2 times, but you're going to have lots of sets of that. And then for hypertrophy, this is the bodybuilder. They're going to work at between 67 and 85% of their 1 repetition max, and they'll do this 6 to 12 times. This is where 3 sets of 10 comes from. 3 sets of 10 there. And then for muscular endurance, less than 67%, and you'll do greater than 12 reps. Okay, so we try and stay out of this 3 sets of 10 because that's bodybuilding, that's not physiotherapy. So by the end of this session, you should be able to explain the concepts of functional fitness, to apply the functional movement training in accordance with those 7 movement patterns, and then identify the 3 levels of functional movement. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you in the next podcast.